I'm Nick, and this is the Minisforum MS-A2. Last year, I did a video talking about the MS-01, which is this guy right here, and I made the claim that this little mini PC could replace all of the servers in your home lab, and for us, it did for about 9 months. What if I told you that the MS-A2 and the A in A2 stands for AMD? Because this one, ladies and gents, features the AMD Ryzen 9 9955HX, a 16-core, 32-thread monster that, honestly, with the same dual SFP Plus connections, can completely run your home lab. What I think may be interesting to you guys is doing similar to what we did with the MS-01 with the MS-A2 and show you how to use it for a specific use case, which for me is virtualization and containers. And rather not showing you how to do that, but if it even allows you to install it without headaches, because if I'm being honest, the MS-01 with its P cores and E cores, especially with VMware, is a bit of a pain in the butt. But spoiler alert, no such problems with the MS-A2. Let's see what it's like under the hood. As mentioned, the Minisforum MS-A2 is using the AMD Ryzen 9 9955HX. This is a 16-core, 32-threaded CPU with a boost clock of up to 5.4 gigahertz and a base clock of around 2.5 gigahertz. The most interesting thing about this processor, for me at least, is the power envelope on the CPU. So the TDP is a variable TDP from 55 watts up to 75 watts. However, mysteriously, in the BIOS, eco mode is missing. Well, the option is there, but it is technically not there because you can't select either TDP mode. Also, you'll find that because this is a mobile processor and this is a Ryzen 9 9000 part, it is still a Zen 5 chip. I think the use case for this CPU is really laptops and mini PCs like this, especially with that 55 watt power envelope. If you could make this a 55 watt chip guaranteed for your home lab, it is satisfying one huge thing with home labbing, and that is saving power, right? However, this does come in a couple different configurations. This isn't the only one. First of all, we've got the Ryzen 9 7945HX version, as well as the Ryzen 9 9955HX version, which is the version that we've got here. However, available is a little bit of a stretch considering the estimated delivery date at the time of filming this is much later than when we're actually filming this. So the bare bone version of the MS-A2 with the 7945HX is starting at around about $639 US. And I would say that that value is not too terrible considering that price looks like it's come down from around about $800 US. Now, if you were to add the version with RAM as well as storage, that'll bump the price up to around about $800 US, down from about $1,000 US. But the one that you're more interested in, which is the one that we're covering here, is this version here, the 9955HX version. So for the bare bone kit for the MS-A2, you're looking at around about $871 US. That looks like the price has come down from around about $1,090 US, saving around about 200 odd US at the time of filming. However, as I mentioned, the version that we have here does have memory and a 1 terabyte SSD, and that will set you back around about $1,135 US at the time of filming this video. It could be cheaper by the time you see this, guys, so you know, it is what it is. And that looks like the price came down from around about $1,419 US, saving you almost $300 US at the time of filming. Here's the story with this though. I think there should be a third option, right? And the third option being that they should have a version that will just give you the memory and no storage, bringing the price down. Because what's happening is something that I've talked about Minisforum doing before, is they're rolling the cost of Windows into the mini PCs that you're buying from them, right? The license has to be paid for from somewhere. And the fact that we're paying for it because it includes an M.2 is a little bit silly. Give us an option with either no OS installed to bring the price down or no drive whatsoever. Yeah, just some food for thought. I'll put some links down below in the description. If you're looking at getting your hands on an MS-A2, there'll be affiliate links. So if you use those links, you are definitely helping us out here on the channel. But I bet you want to know what you're actually getting for your hard-earned money. So let's take a look at the I/O. As for the front I/O, we've got a power button, which now has a white light rather than a blue light like the MS-01. We've got a combined headphone and microphone jack. There's 3 USB Type A ports, 2 a USB 3.2 Gen 1, which is 10 gigabit, as well as a single USB 2.0 port. On the rear, there's 2 USB Type-C ports. These are USB 3.2 Gen 2 10 gig ports with DisplayPort Alt, and these are DisplayPort 2.0 ports. There's also a single HDMI 2.1 port. There's 2 2.5 gigabit LAN interfaces, one being an Intel i226 adapter, and the other one being a Realtek RTL 8125. So there's technically 2 different vendor adapters on this, which we'll come back to a bit later because it does play a little bit of a part in how this is used for home labs in certain situations. And the bit that you guys are most interested in is the 2 SFP Plus ports. That's right, this has dual 10 gigabit Ethernet with 2 of the Intel converged X710 adapters. There's a couple reasons for this, and yeah, I've got some interesting thoughts on this one, because now that we know that Realtek has a $10 10 gigabit Ethernet chip available on the market, which was like, it only really went into production maybe a month and a half ago. These mini PCs, and in fact all PCs, are about to get a lot better, a lot faster with regular RJ45 10 gigabit Ethernet, because for SFP Plus connections, you need to do one of a few things to get connectivity. First of all, you need to use either a direct attached copper cable and have a switch that is capable of accepting those SFP Plus direct attached copper connections, or you need to use a transceiver that will allow you to either use fiber or regular RJ45. And I would say that typically if you're using this in a home lab, and home labbers tend to be quite thrifty with buying hardware, they'll probably use direct attached copper. But for all of my testing and everything that I did with this here in the studio, I do have a 10 gig switch. It's an RJ45 10 gig switch, so I use transceivers for all of that. I thought an interesting test to show you guys what network transfer speeds would be like if I copied some of the raw video files from this project across the network with a 10 gig RJ45 transceiver, so you can see what type of speed you're getting. Now, the storage device I'm connecting to is very fast, and it's an SSD based NAS, so we can probably utilize the whole 10 gig link speed. So let's see what happens. We are completely maxing out this 10 gig interface right now. If you look at Task Manager, we're basically hitting 9.9 gigabit, which is 10 gig, give or take. Now, the limitation here would also be the I/O of the drives that we're pulling the data from. We're currently pulling a massive amount of data. It's like maybe 60 or 70 gigs of video. So if you're interested in what it looks like to use for a workstation for video editing purposes, you can see what the throughput is truly like. Absolutely blazing fast connections here. Now, you can load balance these two to max that out even more, but you know, then you're limited by your networking gear and every other device connected to your network. And that's it, we're all done. Look at that. That folder was, let's see how big it was, 74 gigabytes. And you watch that copy in real time. While I've got the MS-01 still out, I just want to show you guys what the differences were physically between the MS-01 and the MS-A2. So first of all, the most apparent thing is the rear I/O is exactly the same in its layout, which means they've recycled, well, rather reused this chassis for both of these enclosures. If we whip around and check out the front of the 01 and the A2, you'll also see the same thing, but inside is where it's very different. To get inside the MS-A2 is like the MS-01. There's a little button that you need to depress, kind of just like me, and then you slide it out and then you can get access to the internals of the A2. And the keynote out there will notice our good friend, that by 16 PCIe slot is still there. However, it is physically wired as PCIe by 16, but it will only allow you to set it to by 8. And even in the BIOS, when you go through the settings, it is only a by 8 slot, but it does support bifurcation. So if you had a storage card with two M.2 drives and you wanted to use it by 4x4, you can also do that in this slot. The reason why this is a by 16 size slot is for compatibility, but all the graphics cards, if that is what you wanted to do with this, that you'd want to fit in here, would probably be by 8 anyway. And the one that I tested, which I didn't show performance, I just wanted to show you that it worked, was this one right here. This is the AMD Radeon Pro W6400, and this card right here, if you look very, very closely at the edge connector, is a PCIe Gen 4 by 4 card. So yeah, it's kind of perfect for a system like this. In fact, this is the card that I've been using in my MS-01, because after retiring the MS-01, that is now my new Linux tinkering computer, and this graphics card is perfect for that. The other thing with the MS-A2 and mini PCs with PCIe by 16 size slots is it's not just for graphics cards. Now, my use case that I had previously was a storage card, or rather an HBA with external mini SAS connectors, so I could connect it to a disk shelf. To get access to the memory, we need to remove these 3 screws on the blower. And then they've made this a lot easier than the MS-01. You can just lift the blower up without any crazy maneuvering. You can unplug the blower's power cable as well. And just lift that up and away from the A2. As mentioned, the version I have here is the 64 gig version. So it does have 2 32 gig crucial modules. They're both 5600 mega transfers, making 64 gigs of RAM. You know, 32 plus 32 equals 64. Well, it does if we use the math that we use, not the stuff that Terrence Howard guy uses. I don't know why he's like that. It's also worth mentioning that the MS-A2 will support up to 96 gigs of RAM as well. And I would almost go as far as saying that it will probably support up to 128 gigs, given memory modules are available and a BIOS update exists that will allow you to install that much memory. Also, as mentioned before, the version of the A2 that we have has the 1TB NVMe M.2 pre-installed with this heatsink. We need to remove this blower as well. There's 3 screws that hold this one in. 1, 2, 3. The reason for the blower here is not specifically for M.2 drives, it's to help cool the controller chips for the SFP plus 10 gigabit interfaces. As I mentioned not too long ago, new 10 gig adapters are coming that are much cheaper and won't require this type of cooling. That's gonna change mini PCs forever. Other than this pre-installed M.2 drive, there's 2 more M.2 slots on this board. Both of them are PCIe Gen 4 by 4 M.2 slots. So you've got plenty of room for expansion. If we circle back to the MS-01 video and we take a look at the storage configuration, the motherboard in the MS-01 supports U.2 drives, and there's a switch and some very interesting wording written on the board. Boring.
Tactical nuke ready for launch.
M.2 SSD may be damaged when switch is not in M.2 on. What does that mean? Well, they've removed all of that from this board to stop the confusion and stop people from damaging drives, so you just have 3 M.2 drives only in NVMe configuration, not U.2 drives. I think the fact that they didn't include U.2 drive support in the A2 is a bonus and not a missed feature. Let us know your thoughts down below in the comments. Do you need U.2 drive support in a mini PC? I don't think so. And that, my friends, brings us to the last part of the MS-A2, and that is the cooling solution for the 9955HX and the integrated GPU. It has a fully copper heatsink and a heat pipe configuration. To remove this is much easier than the MS-A2. I don't need to puncture a hole through the foam anymore. They have a hole already there. The reason why this is here is to help guide airflow out the back of the chassis anyway. You remove those 3 screws, you'll be able to pull off the entire heatsink from the case itself, and you'll be able to take a look at what the situation is with the CPU. There's thermal pads for some MOSFETs and for the VRM layout on this board as well. So I think what we're seeing here is a bit of an improvement on the design with the MS-A2, given they've done this a couple times now in this type of enclosure, so they really know what they're doing when it comes to these high performance mini PCs and the design. Especially for me, I think the most interesting thing is the fact that the entire heatsink and heat pipe setup is now copper and not a composite of aluminium and copper, which the MS-A2 did. And this just seems to me like a much better thermal solution. However, if I'm being absolutely honest, I didn't test the thermals for this system because, to be honest, I don't think that it's really a big deal if you're going to be home labbing with this, because typically you would have a well ventilated space for this, or maybe you don't. But one thing I will say is the fan noise, when you're really pumping it, it can get quite noisy. Let's take a look at the acoustics, because this is something that I think is much more important than the thermals themselves. Also, I wanted to keep in mind that I did replace the thermal paste on this after pulling it all apart. First of all, I wanted to show you the ambient noise floor reading of around about 32 decibels in the studio itself. And then what I wanted to do is boot up the MS-A2 and show you what it sounded like at idle. So about 36 dB, which is only 4 to 5 dB above ambient. And finally, absolutely smashing the MS-A2, we see a reading of around about 42 dB. So overall, it is a very quiet system under full load. Much better than the MS-A2. I know I keep drawing comparisons back to the MS-A2 because that, to me, was just such a great product. And although the MS-A2 is also a great product, and to be honest, I think it's worth the money, it's missing one major feature that made the A2 really good for home labbing, and that is some way to remotely manage this from boot up. Like let's say with IPMI, because the MS-A2 had Intel vPro, and you could use something like Mesh Commander, and it would allow you to completely connect to and manage the system remotely, whereas the A2, as far as I can tell, doesn't have a solution for that. But you know, I could be wrong, and you can add an add-in card, or you could use a Pi KVM to do it, but the fact that there's nothing built in to do it is a bit of a letdown. Not gonna lie, but not a deal breaker, because when I drop in my M.2 drive with VMware ESXi 8.02 that I use for testing on the MS-A2, it boots up pretty quickly and everything works right out of the gate. In fact, the only thing that I can find that doesn't work is that Realtek network interface. When I was reconfiguring the management interfaces, it simply was not there. That doesn't mean that I can't physically pass that adapter through to a virtual machine, because I can also do that too. You can see that I've got VMware ESXi running very well on here with 0 issues whatsoever. You can see this is a bit of an older version. ESXi 9 is out now, but this is a version 8 because this was the drive that was running on the host for the MS-A2. I did change a lot of the configuration. I basically deleted all of the boot flags to help boot it with that Intel CPU with the P cores and the E cores, but in this setup, it works perfectly. Obviously, there's no virtual machines running here. You can see we've got the CPU here, the AMD Ryzen 9 9955HX, it's the MS-A2, and basically everything you need to know. As for network interfaces, this is something I think you guys might find interesting. For the physical adapters, you'll notice that the Realtek 2.5 gigabit Ethernet adapter is not available here. That's because VMware typically does not support Realtek adapters. There is a way to use it though, and it involves you passing through
the adapter to a virtual machine. You can also pass the wireless adapter through here. So you can see we've got the Realtek 8125 and we can turn on the pass-through. And now if you wanted to, you could pass that physical 2.5 gigabit adapter to any virtual machine that you create on this host.
I think the major benefit of the MS-A2 is to get things working, it is less of a headache than the MS-01. Say for instance with VMware ESXi. I drop in that filthy M.2 drive with VMware on it and it ran without a problem in the A2.
Proxmox installation is smooth right out of the gate. Nothing had to be done here. This is just a clean USB stick doing a fresh install on a fresh M.2 drive, and absolutely everything works right out of the gate, as it should, because Proxmox is very, very compatible with just about every modern hardware configuration. You can see the CPU here, the AMD Ryzen 9 9955HX, so 16-core processor. You can see all of our memory here. And overall, this thing runs just fine. Now, the reason why I like Proxmox now, as opposed to about a year ago, is, ladies and gents, here's a really interesting use case. All I use Proxmox for these days is containers. That's right. I only use Proxmox as an LXC container host, and if I was to deploy the MS-A2 on our network, this is exactly how I would use it. I wouldn't use VMware anymore because I figured that most of the things that I use are basically containers, not actual full virtual machines anymore. How times have changed. So yeah, happy to report Proxmox works with no issue whatsoever.
As far as Proxmox is concerned, as you already saw, it worked with zero issues. I ran the installer, I did the thing, and the only issue I ever have with installing stuff on mini PCs is my capture card being absolute doggy doo-doo. It just loves to jump around with resolutions on integrated GPUs. I don't know why it does it, but it does. All right, I gotta be honest with you guys. I didn't test the thermals on this for a very good reason, because that's not what I think this is all about. Sure, it has an integrated GPU. Sure, the performance for a 16-core CPU is probably going to be very good, but what people are more interested in, and what I'm more interested in, is what can this do for you in terms of its intended use case. And after the MS-01 came out, you can see that Minisforum has really leaned into more home lab type of devices. And that's exactly what this is. When the MS-01 came out, there was a massive gap in the market for a Ryzen-based mini PC that is designed specifically for home lab use. And that's exactly what the A2 does. It fills that big AMD-sized hole. I have a question for you guys, and this is the power of YouTube. What would you use this for if you were to buy one of your own? Would you use it for your home lab, or would you use this as a workstation? I'm very curious to see what use cases are for this. For me personally, and a lot of people that I've talked to about the MS-A2, is this will be a server for their home lab. Or, to be honest, you could make a cluster of these and make the most insane data center based server setup too, which is where a very interesting product from Minisforum is coming out very soon, called the MS-S1, and it's a 2U rack mount server, which, yeah, when that comes, we'll be ready with bated breath. And if you want to see that when that comes, make sure you subscribe and turn notifications on, because we will be covering the MS-S1, the first 2U rack mount server with a mobile CPU. And if you want to watch some other mini PC content, you can watch this video right here. I'm only doing this because RobTech told me to do it, because he does it at the end of his videos. Do people click on cards? I don't know how it works, because our click-through rate was 0%. Because people hate me and they don't get to the end of our videos.